I never thought a strand of Christmas lights would turn into a neighborhood war. But that's exactly what happened. When Barbara Henderson from the Pinewood Heights, HOA, decided my icicle lights violated some obscure covenant I'd never heard of. It started on the first Saturday of December when I was up on my ladder, carefully hanging the LED icicle lights along my roofline in Greenville, South Carolina. My name is Marcus Albright, and I just bought this house 6 months ago. It was my first real home after years of apartment living, and I was excited to finally decorate for the holidays without worrying about deposit deductions or landlord complaints. The lights were beautiful, these cascading white LED icicles that created a winter wonderland effect. My neighbors on both sides had already complimented me when I was halfway through installation. I was securing the last section when I heard a sharp voice from below. "Excuse me, excuse me." I looked down to see a woman in her mid-50s with a severely angled bob haircut that seemed to match her equally severe expression. She wore a cream-colored cardigan despite the mild 60-degree weather and clutched a leather-bound folder against her chest like a shield. "Can I help you?" I called down, trying to maintain my balance on the ladder. "I'm Barbara Henderson, president of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. I need to speak with you about those lights immediately." I climbed down, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Sure, what about them?" Barbara opened her folder with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. According to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenants, all exterior holiday decorations must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee at least 2 weeks in advance. "You've installed these without permission." I blinked at her. "I read through the HOA documents when I bought the place. I don't remember seeing anything about getting approval for Christmas lights." "It's clearly stated," she insisted, turning the folder to show me a page dense with tiny text. "Additionally, white lights are considered too bright and create light pollution that disturbs other residents." I looked at the page, then at her. "Mrs. Henderson, these are LED lights. They're actually less bright than traditional bulbs. And my neighbor 3 houses down has the exact same icicle lights. I used his as inspiration." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That resident has grandfathered approval from before the current covenant revision. You do not. I'm issuing you a notice of violation. You have 48 hours to remove the lights or face a fine of $500. $500. I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "For Christmas lights." "For violation of HOA covenants," she corrected primly. "The fine structure is clearly outlined. Continued non-compliance results in additional fines of $250 per week until the violation is corrected. Good day, Mr. Albright." She handed me a printed notice and walked away before I could protest further, her sensible flats clicking against the sidewalk with military precision. I stood there holding the violation notice, feeling my excitement about the holidays drain away. My neighbor, Tom Richards, came out of his house with his golden retriever. "Let me guess, Barbara happened." "You know her," Tom laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Everyone knows Barbara. She's been HOA president for 7 years and treats the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. Last year she fined the Johnsons $2,000 because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black." "You're kidding." I wish I was. The mailbox was slightly faded, and apparently that violated the aesthetic standards. They had to replace it and pay the accumulated fines. Tom shook his head. "My advice, just take the lights down. It's not worth the hassle." But I didn't take them down. Maybe it was stubborn pride, or maybe it was the principle of the thing, but those lights stayed up. I spent that evening researching HOA law in South Carolina and discovered that, while HOAs had broad authority, they also had to follow proper procedures. I pulled out my closing documents and found my copy of the covenants. I read through every single page that night. Section 12 did exist, but paragraph 4 said nothing about white lights or advance approval. It only stated that decorations should be in keeping with the tasteful aesthetic of the community and couldn't remain up past January 15th. My lights definitely qualified as tasteful, and it was only December. Sunday morning, I drafted a formal response to the violation notice, citing the actual covenant language and requesting clarification on where the supposed rules about white lights and pre-approval existed. I delivered it personally to Barbara's house, a pristine colonial with not a single decoration in sight, dropping it in her mailbox. Monday evening, I found another notice on my door. The fine had been issued, $500, due within 30 days. The notice stated that my refusal to comply demonstrates willful disregard for community standards. I was angry now. This wasn't about lights anymore. This was about someone on a power trip trying to bully me into compliance. I called an attorney Tuesday morning, a guy named David Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. His consultation fee was $200, but I figured it was worth it. This is pretty typical, unfortunately, David told me over the phone after I'd emailed him all the documents. HOAs in South Carolina have significant power, but they have to operate within their own governing documents. From what you've sent me, there's no violation here. The covenant language is vague enough that reasonable Christmas lights would fall within acceptable parameters. So what do I do? Formally dispute the fine in writing. Request a hearing before the HOA board, which is your right under state law. Document everything. Take photos of your lights and any comparable decorations in the neighborhood, and whatever you do, don't pay that fine. Paying it implies you're accepting the violation. I followed his advice. I sent a certified letter disputing the fine and requesting a board hearing. I photographed my lights and the identical ones 3 houses down. I also documented at least a dozen other houses in Pinewood Heights with various Christmas decorations, none of which seemed to have gotten violation notices. Barbara's response came within 2 days. The board hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at 7 in the evening at the community clubhouse. The letter was coldly formal and warned me that failure to appear would result in additional fines. That week, something interesting started happening. I began getting visitors from other neighbors. First was Angela Morrison from 2 streets over, who'd been fined $300 for planting roses in her front yard without approval. Then came the Patels, who'd been hit with ongoing fines because their teenage son's car was considered commercial since it had a small decal from his part-time pizza delivery job. By Friday, I'd spoken to nearly a dozen homeowners who'd been fined for what seemed like ridiculous violations. Barbara's been running roughshod over this neighborhood for years, Angela told me over coffee on my back patio. But most people just pay because fighting it seems too expensive or time-consuming. The fact that you're actually standing up to her has people talking. I just want to keep my Christmas lights up, I said. This has gotten completely out of hand. That's how it starts. First it's lights, then it's mailboxes, then it's what color you paint your shutters. She fined my mother-in-law $200 for parking on the street overnight when she visited last year, even though there's nothing in the covenants about guest parking restrictions. Monday evening arrived and I showed up at the community clubhouse at 6:45, armed with my binder of documents, photos, and copies of the relevant covenant sections. I expected a small meeting. What I found was standing room only. At least 40 residents had shown up, and the tension in the room was palpable. Barbara sat at the front table with 4 other board members, looking distinctly displeased at the turnout. "This is a hearing for Mr. Albright's violation," she announced. "It's not open to general commentary." "Actually," I said, standing up, "under South Carolina HOA law, all board meetings must be open to homeowners unless they involve personnel matters or pending litigation. These people have every right to be here." Barbara's face flushed. "Fine. Let's proceed. Mr. Albright, you've been cited for violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 regarding unauthorized exterior decorations. Do you dispute this violation?" "I absolutely dispute it." I opened my binder. "I've read Section 12, Paragraph 4 multiple times. Nowhere does it mention required pre-approval for holiday decorations. Nowhere does it specify that white lights are prohibited. The only requirement is that decorations be tasteful and removed by January 15th. My lights meet both criteria." "The architectural review requirement is implied by the tasteful standard," Barbara countered. "The committee determines what's tasteful." "Then why haven't you cited Robert Morrison 3 houses down from me? He has identical lights. Why haven't you cited the Chens with their inflatable snowmen? Or the Rodriguezes with their projection lights? I have photos of at least 15 homes with comparable or more extensive decorations, none of which have been cited." I passed copies of my photo documentation to the board members. Several of them looked uncomfortable as they flipped through the images. One of the board members, a mild-mannered man named George Patterson, cleared his throat. "Barbara, these are good points. I don't remember us ever enforcing pre-approval for Christmas lights before." "We enforce when violations are brought to our attention," Barbara said stiffly. "But who brought this to your attention?" I pressed. "You came to my house personally within hours of me putting up the lights. Were you just driving around looking for violations?" "Because that seems like selective enforcement, which is actually prohibited under HOA law." The room buzzed with murmurs. Barbara's flush deepened. "I take my responsibilities as HOA president seriously. Part of that is maintaining our community standards." "Then maintain them equally," Angela Morrison called out from the audience. "You fine me for roses, but let the Hendersons on Maple Street plant an entire wildflower garden without saying a word." That opened the floodgates. Other homeowners started calling out their experiences with what they felt were unfair or selective fines. The meeting devolved into chaos for several minutes before George Patterson banged his hand on the table. "Everyone, please, let's maintain order." He looked at Barbara, then at me, then at his fellow board members. "I move that we table this violation and fine pending a full review of our enforcement procedures and covenant language. We clearly need to establish clearer guidelines if there's this much confusion and disagreement." Another board member, Susan Yates, nodded immediately. "I second that motion." Barbara looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. "This is highly irregular." "So is fining someone for Christmas lights when half the neighborhood has similar decorations," George said quietly but firmly. "All in favor?" 3 hands went up immediately. Barbara's was not among them, nor was the 5th board member, a thin man named Craig Newsome who seemed to hang on Barbara's every word. "Motion passes," George said. "Mr. Albright, the fine is suspended pending our review. Keep your lights up." "Barbara, I think we need to call a special board meeting to discuss our enforcement policies more broadly." I left that meeting feeling vindicated but also slightly uneasy. Barbara had shot me a look of pure venom as I'd packed up my materials. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next 2 weeks were surprisingly peaceful. My lights stayed up, glowing beautifully every evening. I got compliments from passing joggers, and a couple of kids in the neighborhood told me my house was their favorite on their walk to the school bus stop. It felt good. Then, about 10 days before Christmas, I came home from work to find the neighborhood in unusual activity. There were workers everywhere, some up on ladders, others stringing lights along the community clubhouse, the entrance sign, and the walking paths that wound through Pinewood Heights. Tom Richards was out walking his dog again. "Big HOA project," he explained when I asked. "Barbara announced it at the board meeting last week. They're installing a professional holiday light display throughout the common areas. Supposedly it's going to be the best display in Greenville and put us on some kind of neighborhood tour map." I watched as workers carefully installed what looked like very expensive commercial-grade LED lights. That must be costing a fortune. Probably. But you know Barbara. She's obsessed with making Pinewood Heights the most prestigious community in the area. I'm guessing this is partly a response to your whole situation. She's going to show everyone what proper Christmas lights look like. Over the next few days, the display came together. And I had to admit, it was impressive. The entrance to Pinewood Heights now featured an elaborate archway of lights, programmed to shift through different colors and patterns. The clubhouse looked like something from a high-end resort. The walking paths were lined with elegant post lights wrapped in matching LED strands. I ran into George Patterson at the grocery store that Saturday. "The display looks great," I told him honestly. He grimaced. "It does, but we're already having problems. The system Barbara insisted on is this fancy smart light setup that's supposed to be controllable from an app, synchronized to music, the whole 9 yards. But it keeps glitching. Half the entrance arch didn't light up last night and the programming seems to reset randomly." "Who installed it?" "Some company Barbara found called Prestige Holiday Lighting. They're based out of Charlotte. Charged us $45,000 for the installation and setup." I nearly dropped my grocery basket. $45,000. Barbara convinced the board it was an investment in property values. But now the company is saying the problems are user error, not their installation, and they want another $5,000 to come back and troubleshoot. George shook his head tiredly. "Honestly, Marcus, I'm starting to wonder if I should just resign from the board. This isn't what I signed up for." That evening, I drove through the neighborhood to look at the display more carefully. It really was beautiful when it was working, but I could see what George meant. Sections would suddenly go dark, then flash back on in the wrong pattern. The color transitions that were supposed to be smooth were jerky and uncoordinated. From a technical standpoint, it looked like either a programming issue or a problem with the controller system. I have a background in electrical engineering. It's literally what I do for a living, designing control systems for manufacturing plants. I could probably diagnose the problem in an hour, but there was no way I was volunteering to help Barbara after she tried to fine me $500 for my simple Icicle lights. Monday morning, I was leaving for work when Barbara's car pulled up in front of my house. She got out and I noticed she looked tired and stressed, her usually impeccable appearance slightly rumpled. "Mr. Albright," she said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "Do you have a moment?" "I'm heading to work," I said, unlocking my car. "This won't take long." She took a breath. "I understand you work in electrical engineering, system controls specifically." "That's right. Our holiday display is having technical difficulties. The company that installed it is being difficult about providing support, and we have several neighborhood tour groups scheduled to come through this week. I was wondering if you might be willing to take a look at the system." I turned to face her fully. "You want me to fix the HOA's Christmas lights? The same HOA that tried to fine me $500 for my Christmas lights?" "I understand the optics are awkward," she said stiffly. Awkward. Mrs. Henderson, you threatened me with escalating fines, challenged my decorations in front of the entire board, and made my first Christmas in my new home incredibly stressful. And now you want me to help you. The neighborhood tour is important for property values, which benefits all homeowners, including you. I almost laughed at the audacity. Let me be clear. I'm not interested in helping the HOA with this problem. You have the company's contact information. Work it out with them. They're demanding $5,000 just to come back, she said, and for the first time, I heard something other than imperious confidence in her voice. It sounded almost like desperation. The board is already upset about the initial cost. If we have to pay another $5,000 and the system still doesn't work, there's talk of calling for my removal as president. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, I said, opening my car door. Mr. Albright, please. I'm asking for your help. You're asking for my help after trying to bully me into taking down decorations I had every right to display. Why exactly should I help you? Barbara was quiet for a moment. You're right. I was unfair to you. The covenant language doesn't specifically require pre-approval for holiday decorations. I was interpreting it broadly because I believed your lights would set a precedent for more elaborate displays that I felt were tacky. But then, you approved a $45,000 light display that's more elaborate than anything any homeowner would install. Yes, well. She looked away. That's different. It's a community feature. It's hypocrisy, Mrs. Henderson. You didn't like my lights, so you tried to use your position to force me to remove them. That's abuse of power, plain and simple. I understand that now. The admission seemed physically painful for her. Several board members have made similar points in recent discussions. I may have been overzealous in my enforcement approach. May have been. She bristled slightly, then seemed to force herself to relax. I was overzealous, and I'm sorry. Your lights are lovely. I should have said so from the beginning instead of looking for reasons to cite violations. It was possibly the most insincere-sounding apology I'd ever heard, but I could tell it was genuine in its own way. Barbara Henderson was clearly not someone accustomed to admitting she was wrong. I need to think about it, I said finally. I'll let you know. I drove to work thinking about the situation. Part of me wanted to let Barbara twist in the wind. She'd earned it with her behavior. But another part of me, the part that actually cared about the neighborhood and my fellow residents, recognized that the holiday display was something a lot of people were excited about. It wasn't fair to punish them for Barbara's actions. At lunch, I called George Patterson. Barbara came by this morning asking me to look at the light display. I heard she was planning to do that. Look, Marcus, I don't blame you if you tell her to pound sand. What she did to you was wrong, and several of us on the board have told her so directly. What's the real story with this lighting company? George sighed. Barbara found them online. They had impressive photos, claimed to work with high-end developments. But I've done some digging since things started going wrong. They're not actually a lighting company. They're a general contracting company that branched into holiday lighting last year. This is only their second major installation, and the first one was apparently a disaster too. So we're dealing with inexperienced installers working with unfamiliar equipment. Exactly. And now they're stonewalling us because they don't want to admit they're in over their heads. Barbara paid them the full contract amount up front, which was mistake number one. Did you get any kind of warranty or service agreement? Supposedly 90 days, but they're claiming this is user error or programming issues that aren't covered. It's a mess. I thought about it. If I agree to look at it, I want something in writing from the board. What kind of something? First, a formal letter withdrawing the violation notice and fine against me, with acknowledgement that my decorations were compliant with HOA covenants. Second, a revision to the enforcement procedures requiring documented evidence of actual violations before any fines are issued, and requiring consistent enforcement across all residents. Third, a public apology from Barbara at the next general homeowner meeting. George was quiet for a moment. That third one's going to be tough. Barbara doesn't do public apologies. Then she can figure out her light display on her own. I'm not doing this to be nice, George. I'm doing this because I care about the neighborhood, but I'm not letting the HOA pretend none of this happened. There need to be changes, or Barbara's just going to keep targeting residents she doesn't like. Give me until the end of the day. I'll talk to the other board members. He called me back at 4:30. We agree to your terms, all of them. I'm emailing you a signed letter from all 5 board members right now. Barbara voted against it, but she was outvoted 4-1. I checked my email and found the letter. It was everything I'd asked for, formally documented and signed. All right, I'll look at the system tonight after work. But I'm not promising I can fix it. If the installation is fundamentally flawed, it might need to be redone. We understand. Thank you, Marcus, really. I went home, changed into work clothes, and headed to the clubhouse around 6. Barbara was waiting there with a laptop and a mess of instructions from Prestige Holiday Lighting. She handed everything over without much comment, which was fine by me. I wasn't interested in small talk. The system was actually pretty sophisticated, which was part of the problem. It used a centralized DMX controller to manage multiple zones of programmable LED lights, all supposedly synchronized through proprietary software. In theory, it was impressive. In practice, it was a nightmare. I spent the first hour just tracing the wiring and checking connections. I found the first problem pretty quickly. The main controller was installed in an outdoor equipment box, but the ventilation was inadequate. The controller had been overheating and automatically shutting down sections to prevent damage. Amateur mistake. The second problem was worse. The zones weren't properly balanced electrically. Whoever had done the installation had overloaded several circuits, causing voltage drops that made the LEDs flicker and malfunction. That required recalculating the load distribution and potentially running new circuit lines. The third problem was the programming itself. The software Prestige Holiday Lighting had used was clearly something they didn't fully understand. The timing sequences were fighting with each other, and the color calibration was completely off. I worked until nearly midnight, making notes and taking photos. Barbara had left around 8, saying she had to get home but leaving me her number to call when I was done. The scope of the problems was significant but not unfixable. Tuesday, I called George instead of Barbara. I found the issues. The good news is they're fixable. The bad news is it's going to take some work. What kind of work? The controller needs to be relocated to a climate-controlled environment. Several circuits need to be rebalanced, which means moving some of the light strings to different breakers. And the programming needs to be completely redone. I can do the programming and supervise the electrical work, but you'll need to hire a licensed electrician to actually do the circuit modifications. How much is that going to cost? For the electrician, probably $2,000 to $3,000, depending on who you hire and how long it takes. I'll do the programming work for free, but I need full access to the system and authority to make changes without Barbara second-guessing every decision. Done. Can you start tonight? I ended up spending the next 4 evenings working on the light display. I called in a favor from a buddy of mine, licensed electrician named Chris Yamamoto, who did the circuit rebalancing at cost. The controller relocation was straightforward once we identified a suitable space in the clubhouse's utility room. The programming was actually the fun part. Once I understood how the system was supposed to work, I could create sequences that actually showcase the lights properly. Smooth color transitions, synchronized patterns, even some sequences timed to popular Christmas music. Friday evening, with the neighborhood tour scheduled for Saturday, I ran the complete system for the first time. The entire display lit up perfectly, colors flowing smoothly through the entrance arch, patterns cascading along the walking paths, the clubhouse glowing with synchronized elegance. A small crowd had gathered to watch, neighbors who'd heard I was working on fixing the lights. When everything came together, they actually applauded. Tom Richards clapped me on the shoulder. "That's incredible, Marcus. You made this thing actually work like it was supposed to." Barbara showed up just as I was packing up my tools. "Mr. Albright, this is extraordinary. The display looks exactly like what I'd envisioned." "It's what you paid for," I said neutrally. "The company you hired should have delivered this from the start." "Yes, well. Thank you for fixing their mistakes." She paused. "The neighborhood tour is tomorrow at 7. I hope you'll attend. I'll think about it." Saturday evening I did attend, mostly out of curiosity. The tour was actually pretty impressive. 3 groups of about 30 people each came through Pinewood Heights, led by guides from the Greenville Visitors Bureau. They loved the display, taking photos and asking questions about the installation. Barbara played hostess, explaining the display and pointing out various features. I hung back, not interested in attention, but George Patterson made a point of introducing me to several people as the engineer who'd made the magic happen. That was more recognition than I was comfortable with, but it was also gratifying to be acknowledged. After the last tour group left, the board members and several neighbors gathered at the clubhouse for coffee and cookies. It felt like a community celebration, people genuinely happy and proud of the neighborhood display. Barbara eventually approached me with a cup of coffee. "I owe you a significant debt, Mr. Albright. Without your expertise, this would have been an expensive disaster." "You're welcome," I said simply. "I also owe you an apology that I haven't properly delivered." She took a breath. "I'm not good at admitting when I'm wrong. I've spent 7 years trying to make this neighborhood something special, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that community means listening to residents, not dictating to them. Your lights were never a violation. They were a homeowner taking pride in his property, which is exactly what I should encourage. I'm sorry for making you feel unwelcome in your own home." It was a much better apology than her first attempt, and it actually sounded sincere. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Henderson. Barbara, please." "I think we're past formalities at this point." She smiled slightly. "Your icicle lights really are lovely, you know. They have an elegance that a lot of more elaborate displays lack." "Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you." The general homeowner meeting was the following Thursday. The turnout was much larger than usual, probably because word had spread about the board's commitment to address enforcement procedures. Barbara, to her credit, stuck to the agreement. "Before we begin regular business, I need to address a matter of HOA governance," she said, standing at the front of the clubhouse meeting room. "Several weeks ago, I issued a violation notice to Marcus Albright regarding his holiday decorations. After review, the board has determined that notice was issued in error. Mr. Albright's decorations were and are in full compliance with our covenants. The violation and associated fine have been formally withdrawn." She paused, and I could see how difficult this next part was for her. "Furthermore, I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Albright. I allowed my personal aesthetic preferences to override fair and consistent enforcement of our rules. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Mr. Albright, if you're here, I hope you'll accept my apology." I stood up so she could see me. "I accept. Thank you, Barbara," she nodded, looking relieved. "The board has also voted to revise our enforcement procedures. Going forward, any violation notice must include specific citation to covenant language, photographic evidence of the violation, and documentation that similar violations throughout the community are being addressed consistently. We're also implementing an appeals process that allows homeowners to challenge violations before fines are assessed. These changes will be formalized in an amendment to our operating procedures, which will be distributed to all homeowners next month." The meeting continued with other business, but the mood was noticeably different from the last one I'd attended. People seemed more relaxed, more willing to participate. The fear of arbitrary fines and selective enforcement had been poisoning the community, and addressing it openly had begun a healing process. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to say thank you, not just for fixing the lights, but for standing up to the unfair treatment. Angela Morrison hugged me. "You did what a lot of us wanted to do but were afraid to. You changed this neighborhood for the better." Christmas came and went beautifully. My icicle lights glowed every evening, and I got constant compliments from neighbors and visitors. The community display continued to draw admirers, with several other neighborhoods asking Barbara for information about replicating something similar. She graciously gave them my contact information instead, which led to several consulting offers I politely declined. I had my regular job and wasn't interested in becoming a holiday lighting expert. In January, I took my lights down per the covenant deadline. The community display stayed up a week longer, then came down as well. Pinewood Heights returned to its normal appearance, quiet streets lined with well-maintained homes, but something had fundamentally changed in the neighborhood. Barbara was still HOA president, but her approach was noticeably different. She consulted more, dictated less. The board meetings became more collaborative. Violation notices, when issued, were now carefully documented and consistently enforced. In February, Barbara actually stopped by my house with a plate of homemade cookies. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "Not just for the lights, but for the wake-up call. I've been doing a lot of reflecting over the past few months." "That's good," I said, accepting the cookies. I got so focused on making Pinewood Heights perfect that I forgot perfect doesn't mean rigid. It means taking care of each other and building a real community. You taught me that, even though that wasn't your intention. "I just wanted to put up some Christmas lights." She laughed, a genuine sound I'd never heard from her before. "And you ended up changing a lot more than that." "Thank you, Marcus." As she walked away, I thought about the bizarre journey from that first confrontation in early December to this moment. I'd bought this house hoping for a fresh start, a place to call home. I'd found that, but not in the way I'd expected. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't just change your own circumstances. Sometimes it changes everything around you too. Spring came, and with it the first board election since I'd moved in. Barbara ran for re-election, but so did 3 other candidates. The election was competitive but respectful, and when the votes were counted, Barbara retained her position but with a clear message. The margin was much narrower than her previous landslide victories. "I hear you," she said at the board meeting where results were announced. "This neighborhood wants leadership that serves, not controls. That's what I'm committed to providing." And she did. Over the following months, I watched Barbara genuinely transform her approach. She started a neighborhood newsletter featuring resident stories and highlighting community members. She organized social events that brought people together rather than just board meetings focused on rules and violations. She even started a community garden project, working with residents to create shared green space. I contributed to the garden, helping design an irrigation system. It felt good to be part of building something rather than fighting against arbitrary restrictions. Tom Richards joked with me one day while we were planting tomatoes. "You know, you're probably the only person in history to have a neighborhood war over Christmas lights and end up actually improving HOA relations." I didn't do anything special. I just refused to back down when I knew I was right. That's more than most people do, and look what it led to. He was right. The neighborhood had changed. People were friendlier, more involved, more willing to speak up about concerns because they knew they'd be heard. The fear that had hung over Pinewood Heights like a cloud had lifted, replaced by genuine community spirit. That November, as Thanksgiving approached, Barbara stopped by again. "I'm planning the holiday display for this year. I'd like your input on the design if you're willing." "You want my input?" "Last year's display was successful because of your expertise. This year, I'd like to do something that incorporates more resident participation. Maybe a section where homeowners can design their own light displays in the common areas. I don't know. I'm looking for ideas." We ended up developing a plan where different streets in Pinewood Heights would each design and install their own section of the community display, with the HOA providing a budget and basic coordination. It turned the project from a top-down showcase into a collaborative community effort. December arrived, and I put up my Icicle lights again, this time without any concern about violation notices. My street section of the community display featured a winter forest theme that connected seamlessly with my lights, creating a cohesive experience along the entire block. The neighborhood tour that year was even more successful than the previous one, partly because the guides could talk about the community collaboration aspect. People loved hearing that residents had designed different sections themselves. Barbara and I ended up becoming unlikely friends. We disagreed on plenty of things, aesthetic taste being just one, but there was mutual respect now. She'd learned to listen, and I'd learned that people could change when given the opportunity and motivation. On Christmas Eve, there was a neighborhood gathering at the clubhouse. Families came with dishes to share. Kids ran around with cups of hot chocolate, and someone set up a projector to show holiday movies on the wall. It was warm and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Barbara found me near the cookie table. "This is what I always wanted Pinewood Heights to be. I just didn't know how to create it." "You created it," I said. "You were willing to change, to admit mistakes, to grow. That takes real courage. You forced me to change by not backing down. That took courage too." We stood there watching neighbors laughing and talking, children playing, the whole community coming together in a way that felt genuine and joyful. Later that evening, walking home under my Icicle lights with snow beginning to fall, soft and perfect, I reflected on the strange journey from confrontation to community. It had started with Barbara threatening me with fines and escalating penalties. It had led to her desperately needing my help when her showcase project failed. And it had ended with genuine friendship and a transformed neighborhood. The lights glowed softly white against the snow, creating exactly the winter wonderland effect I'd envisioned when I first bought them. They'd caused so much trouble and ultimately brought about so much good. Sometimes the smallest stands we make create the biggest changes. I went inside, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat by my front window watching the snow fall and the lights glow. My first Christmas in this house had been stressful and complicated. My second was peaceful and joyful. The neighborhood I'd bought into had become the community I'd always wanted, and it had all started with a simple strand of Icicle lights and a woman who tried to fine me for putting them up. Life, I thought, had a funny way of working out. The years that followed continued to prove that initial confrontation had been a turning point not just for me and Barbara, but for the entire community. Pinewood Heights became known throughout Greenville, not just for its beautiful homes and holiday displays, but for its active, engaged residents and collaborative atmosphere. I stayed in that house, watched neighbors come and go, made lasting friendships, and never once worried about arbitrary HOA violations. Barbara served 3 more terms as president before stepping down to let newer residents take leadership roles. When she did step down, the community threw her a retirement party celebrating her transformation and years of service. In her speech that evening, she told the story of the Icicle lights, laughing at her own rigid thinking and thanking me for not backing down. "Marcus taught me that rules serve people, not the other way around," she said. "That's the most important lesson a community leader can learn." Those Icicle lights hung every December for years, a small reminder that standing up for yourself, even in seemingly small matters, can create change far beyond what you imagine. They weren't just decorations. They were symbols of principle, perseverance, and the possibility that even the most difficult conflicts can lead to positive transformation. And every time I plugged them in on that first evening of December, watching them cascade light down my roofline like frozen waterfalls, I remembered that first confrontation with Barbara Henderson and smiled. Because those lights didn't just illuminate my house. They illuminated a path forward for an entire community, proving that sometimes the brightest lights shine not just during the holidays, but in the darkness when we refuse to let our own light be extinguished by those who would rather see us dim and compliant. That was my story with the Pinewood Heights HOA, the Christmas lights that started a war, and the unexpected friendship and community transformation that followed. It wasn't the holiday season I'd planned, but it became something far more meaningful than simple decorations ever could have been on their own.